Yeah, we can compare notes on the aluminum and stainless steel and see which one is the way to go.
Exactly.
But that was kind of one of the biggest stories in the Apple world this week as we sort of sit in limbo between a major product launch with the iPhone 13 and the iPad mini and then sort of waiting for the next event. This is where we are trapped in this sort of just waiting for the ball to drop, waiting for something to happen. And there wasn't a big amount of news this week. Probably the biggest story was sort of the 10th anniversary of Steve Jobs' passing. Sort of many Apple executives and celebrities and critics alike all sort of reflecting on sort of the last 10 years without Steve Jobs, his sort of everlasting legacy at Apple and certainly the tech world. We can kind of get into Apple sort of in the last 10 years and stuff they've launched. But do you remember, Matt, where you were when you heard the news? I know that's sort of one of the big parts of sort of tech history was sort of that event. Do you remember that day and what happened? Because I certainly remember on my perspective sort of what that day sort of entailed.
Yeah, I mean, it was nothing too notable. I was just at home, and I think that was. I'm trying to decide. So that's 2010, right? Or was that 2011?
It was 2011.
2011. Yeah. So I was only like 4 years into my tech career, if you could say it that way. 4 years before that, I could not care about tech less. That was not even an interest to me. And it was because of the MacBook Pro, which was running Tiger, the 2006 MacBook Pro. One of my friends had one. So I was in the laptop program back in the day. This was before everyone had computers, and I mean everyone had computers, but this is before they were ubiquitous and like every single person had a computer. So at school we had the laptop program, which is a few classes you actually worked on a laptop instead of like notebooks and stuff like that. And my friend had a MacBook Pro, and he was the only one in the school that had one because the school had a deal with Microsoft that we had to use Windows computers. But for whatever reason, he just went against it and nothing happened. So as soon as I saw that, I was like, ooh, this is awesome. And I did the same thing. But that being said, that's when it started that I actually cared about this stuff. I followed it really heavily, and I was on that same MacBook, my very first MacBook that I got when I loaded that Apple website, and I saw the message that he had passed. I think I still have that saved in like Evernote or something. I took a screenshot of it. Nothing crazy, but what about you?
I remember when that happened, I think I was like home from school. It was like the afternoon. And I remember watching Leo Laporte's podcast network, Twit. He had like live breaking news coverage, and they brought on a lot of people and they shared a lot of stories. I remember sort of sharing in that experience with others in the tech space, which I thought was super cool, kind of even if it was just watching that live stream. That was really cool to sort of experience. And now 10 years later, it is crazy to see how much has changed in the world, in the tech world, with Apple, but also just how much Steve Jobs, I guess, credit to him in many ways, but he was a visionary in a lot of respects, but also just to see how the products that he helped to create and help to establish still dominate the tech space. The iPhone, obviously, the iPad, the personal computer with the Mac and the various models, all of those today are still thriving and sort of better than ever. And I tried to sort of do a list of different products that were released sort of in the past 10 years without Steve Jobs. And the list was harder to come up with than I thought. And we can kind of go through those in a second. But I guess before that, Matt, what are your kind of initial thoughts now 10 years later on Tim Cook? There was a lot of debate. I remember very clearly in 2012, 2013, Apple was not innovating. Tim Cook was the wrong guy for the job. Obviously, hindsight is 2020, but sort of looking back now, how do you think Tim Cook has done sort of trying to not even fill the shoes of Steve Jobs, but to really be his successor at the helm of Apple?
Yeah, there's two ways to look at it. You can look at it as how is Apple doing as a business, and then how is Apple doing as what I think a lot of fans and a lot of people in the tech space have thought of as Apple as a philosophy, like what their goal is. And as a company, you can't deny that Tim Cook has just hit it out of the park. They're making boatloads of money, and it's not slowing down, even with all the crazy pandemic stuff. It's still going. There are many new products, many of which are extremely successful. So from that perspective, you can't say Tim Cook has done a bad job. From the kind of ethos and idea of what Apple is to its fans, that I think has changed quite a bit. I think the biggest change that we've seen, though, is that Apple went from this really kind of niche company to, which obviously at the time when they came out with the iPhone and the iPhone started to get popular, obviously it was millions and millions of people using these products. But just in kind of the thinking of it, Windows was the dominant, Microsoft was the big player in the game. If you had an Apple computer, especially, you were kind of going against the crowd. At least that was the idea, even if it wasn't necessarily true. That has definitely changed. Apple is as mainstream as it can ever be. There's still that want for Apple products. People still, make fun of people with green bubbles and stuff like that. As wrong or right as that is, it is still something that happens. So the company has definitely changed. I don't think it's necessarily for the better or for the worse. Apple as a company is doing perfectly well, but yeah, a lot has changed. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, and it's kind of hard to try to track what Apple is going to do next. And it's sort of hard to understand as well the scope of what this means, especially the last couple of years, because, even though Steve Jobs wasn't there, Johnny Ive was still heavily involved. And obviously he has since moved on to his own independent design firm. And it's hard to know sort of how or how pre-involved he was with future products and how involved he currently is. So it's sort of hard to know how much of this was still influenced by Steve Jobs or Steve Jobs type personalities at Apple. But like you said, Tim Cook has obviously helped Apple to become a financial success by basically all accounts, and Apple is still doing better than ever today. But let me ask you about some of your thoughts on some products that I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Steve Jobs might have been involved in one way or another, but these were, by and large, launched in the past 10 years under Tim Cook's leadership. Let's see if these were successes or if they were failures. First things first, probably as I make a mess here on my desk, one of the biggest products to launch under Tim Cook was arguably the Apple Watch. That was sort of his first big product. Since it's been, that launched in 2014, 2015, right? So now about 6 years later.
One of those.
How do you think that has stood the test of time? No pun intended.
So I was looking at this list that you put together, and I'm trying to think of anything else that you missed, and I can't really think of anything. I think this is pretty much it. But the Apple Watch is the only thing on the... Well, no. The Apple Watch is one of two products on this list that is actually new. Everything else is an iteration of some sort. So
right.
For being a completely new product... And relatively early on, that was only 4 years after Steve had left the company and passed. And, there's questions, what was in development, what wasn't in development. But I think it's generally the consensus that Steve Jobs had nothing to do with the Apple Watch. He was not involved. I believe that happened after. Because, for instance, we have the iPad mini on this list. And I think it has come out since then that Steve Jobs knew about the iPad mini. He hated the idea of the iPad mini, but he knew he had to make one. So those kind of things. Steve Jobs was involved in many products that came out way later. But I believe the Apple Watch was not one of them. So in that sense, first Apple, or Tim Cook, I guess you could say, but really Apple saved themselves on the Apple Watch, because when it first came out, it was a cool product, but there was a lot of issues. We've talked about this many times, but it was slow. There was way too many features for the slowness of the product. You couldn't do much on it. You physically couldn't do much on it because of how slow it was. They had the whole debacle of the $10,000 gold watch. There was just so many. It didn't have an identity as a product, but they have really fixed that since then. It's now the notification, fitness, and health machine, and that is exactly what the Apple Watch is. It is, I wouldn't say it's a status symbol, but everyone has one. You walk around, you're not going to, no matter where you go, you're going to see Apple Watches. It has become a successful product. So in that sense, they have done a great job with that. But as I'm looking at the other products here, they all are kind of in line with what was already existing. It's just like iterations on. So let's just go through this list real quick.
Yep.
iPad Pro and iPad Mini. Like I said, the iPad Mini was, Steve Jobs already knew about that, but that was something that came out. iPad Pro, I mean, you could argue that this is just a powerful tablet. It would have happened either way, no matter if Steve Jobs was there or not. But the iPad existed. Apple Silicon Macs, same idea. Apple started doing silicon with the original iPad, the A4 chip, and Steve Jobs was obviously involved with that because he announced that product. So I don't see why that wouldn't have continued exactly the same way it has now. Apple Card, Apple TV Plus, Apple Fitness Plus, News Plus, Arcade, all this stuff. These are iterations on iCloud and services. Now, whether or not some of these would have existed, I'm not entirely sure, but it's not completely new. Like, it's not. The only one I think wouldn't have existed for sure is Apple Card. I don't think Steve Jobs would have done Apple Card.
Well, I'll give Tim Cook credit in that iCloud was around since Steve Jobs. Mobile Me was sort of the predecessor in .Mac and all that stuff. But I do have to
That goes way back.
I'll give Tim Cook credit because obviously Steve Jobs didn't know what the future held, but I don't think that Apple at that time knew what services and streaming and subscriptions was going to be like. And I do think Tim Cook does deserve some credit for sort of pushing Apple into the services industry. He saw what AWS and Google's, cloud offerings, like he saw what the services industry has become. And whether or not I love some of these things, like Apple Card seems like a really weird, that's like one of the weirdest products I think Apple has sort of entered product categories in the last couple of years. And I don't really personally use News Plus or Arcade or stuff like that. TV Plus, I think that was a very interesting. That's got to be a Tim Cook decision, and whether or not it's successful yet is still sort of up in the air. But definitely, Tim Cook has sort of pushed Apple into the services industry, which I definitely think is the future of computing and of technology. So that was a good thing. So I guess we're gonna have to see how successful that is, but it's doing better and better year after year.
Oh,
but I agree with you. A lot of these iterations were. Or a lot of these products, rather, were iterations of existing products. Obviously, the iPhone has changed and evolved, but the iPhone was around. The Apple Watch was really the only true new product. And even, like I'm looking at this list again, Apple Watch, iPad Pro, even the iPad Mini, those were all sort of designed by Johnny Ive, or at least heavily influenced by Johnny Ive. So I mean, I guess there's, obviously a good leader has to delegate, and Steve Jobs wasn't designing the product, so to speak, but he was sort of running the ship, and Tim Cook has done a great job running the ship, and Apple has continued to iterate on products. But obviously there's this question of, if Steve Jobs was still alive and he was still running Apple, what would the company be like today? And would they be, we saw how far ahead they were with the iPhone and the iPad. Would they be even further ahead with these new products developed under Steve Jobs? I guess I want to get your take on that. But also the last product here on this list, which probably again was a Tim Cook decision, which obviously was a very successful decision, probably designed by Johnny Ive, but still a Tim Cook decision, was AirPods. The entire wireless earbud space, even AirPods Max now with wireless headphones. The one thing I forgot to include on this list that also was there was HomePod. That was probably under Tim Cook.
That's how you know how
who knows
successful
if
that product is.
Yeah, not a huge success.
I totally
on
forgot
front.
about that too.
And obviously, Steve Jobs has had his problems too. Like, not everything he touched turned to gold and was successful, but you definitely see a pattern of hit or misses under Tim Cook in the last 10 years, as every company is going to have. But let's talk AirPods specifically.
Hey, you made it to the end of this Apple Circle podcast clip, but there is a full episode. So if you want to listen to that, click the video over here. You can watch the entire thing. Or if you're someone who just wants to listen in your headphones, we have the audio version. Of course, links for that where you can subscribe and listen in your favorite audio podcast player is down below. And last but not least, the Apple Circle channel, where we have mini videos covering everything Apple, is also linked down below. So be sure to check that out and get subscribed.